about deploying an MCP server onto AWS. Specifically, we're going to be running on Lambda. And I actually think that this may be the first time anyone's ever gotten an authenticated MCP server running on Lambda. I think that's true. So it's pretty cool. We had a couple engineers working quite late to get all this set up and working, and really excited to share what we've learned. Okay, I have a lot of tabs open. I'm going to be switching between a lot of them. Let's get started. So first, I'm going to share my entire screen. And then I'm going to go into here. Okay, great. Let's get started. So we're going to talk about building and deploying a production-grade MCP server today. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. And yeah, there's a question of like a certificate of participation. We'll send like an email after saying that you arrived, and we'll also have information in it. Maria will send that as well. Great. So let's go back in history a bit. For those of us who remember, when the web started, everything was static. It was HTTP, maybe FTP, a lot of kind of white pages of blue links. This is kind of was the rise of the browser, the rise of Yahoo, eBay, Amazon, HTML, people working in PHP. This was kind of where the web started. About 20 years later, in about like 2005-ish, the social web, which is the web where you could actually write things back. This is where we start to see things like single page apps become a thing. We saw REST, we saw AJAX, we saw this an explosion and a very different way of thinking about the internet, going from, hey, this is a place where there are many, many websites, to this is a place where I can interact with people, I can create content. It really changed things. It added the idea of writing back and reading content that other people wrote. So it wasn't so unidirectional. Now, how many of you all have found yourself not using Google as much as you used to? And just kind of starting by using ChatGPT or something similar? I know I have. And as I've been thinking about what the new web looks like, it's about 20 years later now, so it's about time for we get to the real Web 3.0. I've been imagining and already finding myself using ChatGPT to interact with everything, asking questions, etc. What's missing is a lot of integrations, things like being able to interact with my Slack and my Jira and my Gmail and all that stuff. Obviously, that's starting to come, but that's the part that felt missing. And then it kind of clicked to me that in the future, very soon, we're going to be using ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, as our way of interacting with the web. So the natural language chat windows, that becomes the way that we interact with the world. It's already kind of happening. But right now it feels very early. But with the rise of MCP and A2A, I think it's going to change things dramatically. The LLM really is the new browser. If we think of how that UX feels, with Web 1.0, that's how things used to look. Imagine Jira. I know a lot of us use Jira and a lot of us don't like Jira. In Jira, what we do is we create a task, we click through, we write the name of the task, we add some tags, we add some owners, we essentially manually fill in a form that more or less goes into a database on the Jira backend. So Jira acts like a system of record, but the way we interact with it is by a lot of point and click. It's inefficient. It looks pretty, but it just takes forever and it's really painful. What LLMs give us is the ability to describe our intent in text without having to be extremely explicit and having it go and figure out what we mean. That's a new concept, the ability to not have to be explicit with an intent. You really can just say, hey, I have a webinar I'm giving Thursday morning. Could you just try to set up some sort of project? on Jira for that to keep track of everything that needs to get done and add the right people. You could write that and it would be able to figure that out and translate that into actual tickets. The thing that's missing, obviously, is its way to interact with something like Jira. And that's why MCP is so transformative. Right now, with MCP, you can connect Claude with Slack, with Gmail, with WhatsApp, with your local file system. All of a sudden, you can interact with everything, all of your everyday applications, just in Claude. Even Marie yesterday got this set up with her Google Suite. So you don't even have to be technical. And you can start using Claude to do things and say things like, hey, are there any emails I need to respond to today? Or can you summarize my emails for the last week? All that stuff becomes possible with MCP and Claude. A lot of people are asking about like A2A, so I just thought I'd like make a little note about it. My view of how things start to work is every app, every SaaS app especially, will have an MCP server attached. I think it's as this wave keeps happening, it's the most obvious and natural way for SaaS companies like Slack to remain very relevant and remain like Web 3.0 native companies. All they need to do is have a MCP interface so that anyone can connect to it either via an agent or just via Claude themselves. Because Claude is more or less an agent, like O1 kind of works agentically nowadays. What A2A provides is the ability for agents to talk to each other. This could be really interesting as we get past MCP or as we get to MCP tools that are maybe more complex, but in themselves are agents. That's where A2A becomes really powerful. It makes it possible for your EA agent, which just keeps track of your Gmail calendar or whatever, to interact with an agent on Expedia that can go and get, a flight set up for you or something. So we at Featureform were extremely excited about MCP. We saw the future, saw the potential. And so the first thing we went to do is start building. We want to go and get up a remote HTTP-based MCP server set up for Featureform. Immediately, we ran into so many roadblocks. First was auth. Auth didn't exist for like 6 months in the MCP spec. It now exists. But even in the current spec, third-party IDPs, which is what most people do. So if you use like Google for login or Okta for login, that's not the default. It's like a secondary thought. There was no Python support for auth. There still is no Python support for auth in the SDK. We had to build this ourselves at Featureform. And none of the clients, like Claude, actually support auth. And again, we had to build our own workaround, which I'll actually be able to demo today, which is pretty cool. Beyond all of that, it just was really hard to implement. Even, we had a few engineers on it. We had some people who worked on auth at Amazon and other places. And even they were kind of scratching their heads sometimes trying to figure out how to properly implement this thing. This is also why the Anthropic team themselves haven't even been able to get this into the Python library. It's not easy. And the spec is being rewritten as we speak, which doesn't help. How it works for us, just to give you a quick, I'm going to show you this in a demo, obviously, but I just want to kind of give you a sneak peek. Is we found a trick, so that if you try to use a tool that needs authentication, like we have a Slack demo we're going to give, it will actually redirect you to go log in via OAuth. And after you log in, you can go back to Claude and just rerun it, and it will work the second time. This was not easy to do. Claude is completely unaware of auth at all. So we actually have a gateway, like a proxy that we run on the that Claude talks to over standard IO, and that handles the whole authentication flow, and it injects messages into Claude to make it do what the user needs to do. But you can see it working here. First time it didn't work, second time it worked after you authenticated. The other big problem with MCP as we think about putting in production, every single MCP server in the like official repo, every single one, official servers, runs locally on your laptop. Claude doesn't even have this ability to support a remotely running MCP server. It's an afterthought, which to me just didn't really make much sense. I understand for like an agentic tool, maybe agentic communication, having standard IO first maybe makes sense. But if we, with our worldview of where MCP is going, where Slack's going to have an MCP server remote, like an mcp.slack.com, and Gmail will have mcp.gmail.com, and all of these apps are going to have MCP servers, they're going to host them. We want them to host them. Like it's way safer. You know, everyone's talking about MCP security. Most of the reasons that MCP people say MCP is insecure is because the way people run MCP servers today is they install essentially executables and just blindly run them on their laptops. If they were authorized servers running on Gmail, like almost all of the vectors of attack go away. Because those vectors of attack assume you don't trust Google. So assuming you do trust Google, it's not an issue. Someone asked, would the issues of auth be mitigated with a local LLM instead of using Claude and ChatGPT? No, because even the auth Python SDK today, or sorry, the Python SDK for MCP today does not have auth. So the TypeScript one does. So if you're using TypeScript, you're able to do it. But even there's not really good integrations to third-party IDPs. So if you're using Okta or Google Login, it's in really, really rough shape. We've built MCP Engine, which I'll talk about, to fix and patch a lot of these issues and also get things. We're essentially ahead of the actual official SDKs in terms of implementing the spec for auth. So eventually, this won't be a problem anymore. But as of today, it is. And I think it'll be months until the SDK actually has some of this stuff like auth. The other major problem is that MCP over HTTP defaults, not the actual, so the version that Claude supports, which was the version that existed for the most amount of time until like 2 weeks ago, only supported using HTTP over SSE. The way that works is you make a connection to the server. It's like a handshake. You keep that connection open. You send all following messages over a new connection, but responses come back on the first connection. If that sounds confusing and it almost seems like it doesn't make sense, yes, it is very confusing. And the reason they do it is it allows the server to send messages back itself. Like the server can initiate a message first, like to send a notification. But it makes everything stateful. It makes it impossible to run an MCP server on Lambda. In fact, I saw AWS ran a webinar recently on MCP servers, and they had to use long-running containers because I don't think they were able to get it working on Lambda specifically because of this issue. But there's no way to get around this stateful HTTP SSE. The new spec has another option to not use SSE. Again, it still wants you to default to SSE, but it gives another part of the spec to not use it. But as you guessed, maybe nothing supports that new spec, not even the official SDKs. So again, we had to go and build this according to spec ourselves to make this work. All of it, what we've done, we've released open source on MCP Engine. If you go to GitHub, you can find it. It's featureform/mcp-engine. Please give us a star. You can see all that we've built. There's a lot going on. We've also have added functionality like a package manager, make it easier to install and use MCP servers. We're really trying to build a production grade implementation of MCP. So like a full SDK that is actually meant for production running HTTP servers with MCP. That's our goal. Also, to be clear, Featureform itself doesn't actually make any money off of MCP or MCP engine. There's no way for us to make money off of it. This is purely because we need it ourselves for our core product, and um, we just needed it, and there was no, it just didn't exist, so we went and built it. I think over time, I'm hoping that the SDK catches up, and we don't have to support this. But in the short term, especially over the next few months, this is the only way to accomplish running authenticated MCP servers, running MCP servers on Lambda, etc. So check it out. We're going to obviously go through and use it right now. So let's talk about what we're going to build today. We're going to build a Slack clone. We call it Smack, using MCP engine. We're then going to use Claude to authenticate and interact with it. So let's look at the code. By the way, this code is on the repo. If you go to the repo and you go to examples, servers, Smack, it's here. So I'm just using this editor just because I use Vim and it's hard to read Vim and it's hard to present Vim. So I'm going to just do it here. I have this class called MessageDB. It's really simple. It has a ton of creating tables in Postgres. It's, just really simple, create a connection. It has two methods that matter. One is add message, which given the sender and the content of the message, it writes it to the database. And then get all messages, which is just a select star. So that's all. That's here. I mean, we can go through it, but it is just, you could probably have Claude write this in a minute. I think actually one of our engineers who wrote this mostly just had vibe coded this and it was fine. But yeah, really simple. Delete message, create message, whatever. Okay. Now that we have that, we can use MCP engine to build a server. So we pip install MCP engine or UV or whatever. You import MCP engine. We also need to import context. The reason we need to import context is because our Lambda or our server needs to maintain a connection to the database across all connections that come in. So the context allows us to build a long running connection so we don't have to reconnect to the database on every single request. There's a question I'm gonna come back to because it's a good question, but let me go a little further first. So we create this lifespan. This is all documented. What the lifespan does is it creates the message GB, connects to it, it yields it. This pretty much, it's almost like a pre and post connect hook. Here's how you connect, then you give the context back with the database in it, and then after the server is closed, we close the connection to the database. That's really all this is doing. We create an MCP engine class. We give a name to the engine called Smack. We set the lifespan, which is again that kind of pre and post hook. We enable or disable authentication, and we set the issuer URL. The issuer URL would be like Google or Okta or wherever, authentication enabled, etc. We are going to show off in this demo. I'm not going to really walk through how to deploy and set it up. We're going to do one later where we get the setup of Cognito on AWS. For this one, we did Keycloak because that's what we tested with locally, but we want to get this working with Cognito. It should actually just work with Cognito. So if someone does do it, let us know. We'd love to push that, but it's kind of a to-do for one of us to go and get Cognito set up. Okay, our MCP server has two methods. There's list messages and post message. We define them as tools. We pass in the context so that we can get the database. We specify that these are authenticated endpoints, and this is the scope that the user needs to use it. We get the database. We run get all messages. we return just really it's a giant string. That's the way MCP works is you return strings. So we just return a giant string describing all the senders and content. For post message, we grab the user from the context. Again, the authentication is gonna figure out the username and all the other things that would come with the login. So we grab that. We again get the database and we just call add message on it. That's all. Very simple. This is just us making sure we can connect to the database. Then we run it. We're going to add this directly into MCP engine, but the way it works now is you use this thing called Mangum, which allows us to run in any like Starlit or Fast API server on Lambda. The reason you have to do that is a lot of scope, but just know that you can't just use UV Acorn, which is what MCP uses by default on Lambda. Maybe there's a way to do it, but we weren't able to figure it out quickly. And it definitely would require some hacks. It's way easier to just use Mangum or something similar. That's all. Two methods. We specify that they're tools. The name of the tool is the name of the function. The description that the Claude gets to decide what to do is here. The scopes and auth are added optionally on top. We create an MCP engine, and then we just run it. That's all. I'll talk about the Docker file. I'm going to look at the questions so far. Can you speak to MCP for querying multiple data sources, such as structured data from a database, APIs, and feeding into LLM or agentic framework? How does security work in this case where there is both secure internal and external data? This is a really, really, really good question. What we're doing with that feature form, like where we're using MCP, is specifically on top of internal data. So if you have internal Redis, Dynamo, etc., we'll actually talk about how to use that using feature form and MCP. The short answer is you authenticate separately to all those tools. Those will be different MCP servers. Claude or similar can actually connect to multiple different MCP servers at the same time. It'll create a different client object for each one. Each of those will maintain its own authentication. So you may have to authenticate multiple times. You're not going to be able to share authentication across the different MCP servers, which is good. It's a good thing because otherwise someone, it's just a security nightmare. But it is possible. And then what happens there is Claude, based on your intent, decides which tools to use. And that's just an LLM thing. LLMs can figure out what tools you should use. Sometimes well, sometimes not well, but that's an LLM problem. Good question. Okay, for the Docker file, we just use the Lambda Docker file for Python. We install and set this thing up. And then we just run it. It's really simple, actually. Nothing here is super crazy. If you Google like how to set up or run a Python script in Lambda with a Docker file, you'll get something that looks like this. Cool. So then what do we do? We build this in Docker. We push it to ECR, which is Elastic Container Registry, which I have here. It's called Kamal Smack. Kamal is our engineer who built this. Smack is the name of our Slack clone. We push the image, pushed a few times. Then we run a Lambda, which we have here. We call the MCP. We point the Lambda to run that image that you can see here. That's all. And so the way Lambda works is every time I make a method call to this running Lambda, it will, you can think of it as serverless, like it's essentially running the function. So in the case of MCP, this isn't exactly true, but you can kind of think of it as these functions in server.py just are cached. And when you make a call to Lambda, it will just run this function, charge you for like the time it's in the function and go away. So you don't have to maintain Kubernetes. You don't have to maintain, it automatically scales infinitely. It's just a really, really nice way to run an MCP server. We also have auth enabled. We set up Keycloak on the EC2 instance. Again, you could use Cognito or something similar. And we have a client set up, which is Smack. And yeah, it's just, again, this is just like you wouldn't use this for anything real the way I set it up, but this is a really good way to show. You typically, again, point this at like Okta, point this at Cognito, point this at something that you would, Google SSO, something that does your auth, and then you would do it there. So yeah, we have it set up. We ran this thing. We have it running right now in the Lambda, and we have Keycloak running. So we can use Claude now. Let's do that. So I'm going to open Claude. I'm going to stop sharing so I can put it up and not show my Slack. Okay. 1 second. Let me share my screen again. Okay. So what I've done is, this is like in the instructions of how to set up an MCP server. I just ran docker run MCP engine proxy, which again, we published. This is just part of MCP engine that we built. And it has a ton of just a configs, which points at Keycloak, points at our client ID. Again, all that stuff doesn't really matter because this server is going to be deleted right after anyway, but you can set all that stuff up. You can see that Claude sees the two functions, those tools, list messages and post messages. You can see in Docker, we have MCP engine proxy running. You can see it's handling, I put on debug mode, but you can see that it's handling the messages that have come. Like there's a list tools message. List, I forget what it's called. List, whatever. There's like a lot of like list methods that get called so that it can figure out what tools exist. I think it just did it right there, actually. So see various methods, resources list. So it's asking for, hey, what resources exist? And then the server responds. Every time this happens, what's going on is the proxy is receiving this from Claude over standard IO. It's making a post request, which hits our Lambda. Our Lambda handles this response automatically. The tools are implied by MCP engine. And then it tells Claude what tools exist. Now I can ask Claude, hey, just give me a number of how many messages are in Smack. Cool. So I'm going to ask it to do this. So it forces you to authenticate all tool requests by design. It will say you're unauthenticated. So then I'm going to go authenticate. I'll have to log in again. Authentication successful. Come back here. Okay, try again. There it is. We got some messages. It shows that there are 2 messages that we already put into the thing. Could you write a message for me saying that we're having a great webinar, please? So I'm going to have it right back on our Slack clone about the webinar. It did it correctly. And can you verify it's in the messages stack? So I just asked it to verify. That's weird. Not sure why it made me authenticate again. Hmm. Well, it wouldn't be a live demo if something didn't go wrong. I think our Keycloak might have restarted. We've seen that happen before. But yeah, you can see it's that the authentication worked. You can see that uh, uh, we were able to deploy this on Lambda. Um, and I want to talk a bit about what we're doing with feature form and where things are going. Obviously, if you have any questions so far, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. Let me get Chrome shared again. Okay. So agents need structured data. This is something that's maybe not talked about as much of MCP. When people talk about MCP, they talk a lot about connections and being able to integrate with other things. But I actually think that one of the most powerful parts of MCP is our ability to use structured data directly in Claude. Imagine someone asks, you're building like a DoorDash support agent. Someone asks, why is my dash taking forever? It's been like an hour. If you use RAG, what it typically is going to do is just look over, let's say, like the help center and try to come up with a response. The response is going to be really generic, right? Like here are examples of reasons that dashers are late. But this is really annoying to a user because they don't really care about that. What they care about is why is my specific dash late? To do this, you need to personalize. So what needs to happen is you need to give the agent the ability to look up the dash location, look up status, look up all these things to give a proper answer. And the way to do that historically, what we've seen people do is they just put giant JSON objects into the request and like prompt engineer it, or they create a ton of custom integration tools. But with MCP, this is way more powerful. It allows anyone to provide an API of relevant tooling that people can use or the agent can use to accomplish its intents. With feature form, think of what I showed you of Slack and Calendar, whatever. We're doing this for internal data. So all the attributes that exist for Redis, for Postgres and Dynamo over Databricks, all that stuff becomes usable by the agents. It will be able to discover what features it has, use relevant ones, and be authorized to get data to solve for an intent. So this is a new iteration of feature form. We think that this is the next generation of feature forms have to look like this to exist for the agentic era. Beyond MCP, you can't just put MCP on Postgres and call it done. It doesn't work. The problem is, one, you need to make sure you have low latency serving, which for something like Redis is fine. But if you're using like a Delta table or Unity catalog, you lose the low latency serving. You also need the semantic catalog because if I just have a random table in Postgres, that's not going to give the MCP enough to be able to work with. It needs to understand what all the columns are and what they're allowed to use. You need agent level governance so that if I ask why my dash is taking so long, I can only get data relevant to my dash and not someone else's. You need audit logs, you need RBAC, you need real-time updates of data. This is all stuff that Feature Form is built for classical ML use cases, and MCP enables us to get this into agentic workflows. So that's what we're doing at Feature Form. It's a feature platform for agentic era. We built MCP Engine, which again I demoed today. It's open source, it's MIT, it's free. We will never make any money on it. It provides authentication, and now we have ways to even deploy directly onto Lambda and other places. So if you're thinking about building production grade HTTP based MCP servers, check out MCP Engine. At least give us a star. Let us know what you think. You can join our Slack community if you have any questions, and we'd be happy to help you and support in any way we can. I hope this was useful. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was an interesting, fun way to get hands-on with MCP beyond just like the 5,000 people on LinkedIn hyping it up. Yeah, any last questions? If you do have any, you can throw them in Q&A. If you're following along on LinkedIn, you can leave a comment there and Maria will pass that along to me as well. Give it a minute. Do you see anything on LinkedIn yet, Marie?
Not yet. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for attending the webinar. After this, I'll send you guys an email with a link to the recording of the webinar. I'll also send the links to the Slack community, and social media, etc., so you can connect with us or reach out to us if you need to.
Awesome.
Oh, and I'll also include links to the MCP engine GitHub, so you can check that out as well.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Oh, someone raised hand. I don't know if that was for a question. If you have a question and you're on Slack, you can just put in Q&A. I'll give it like one more minute if that was supposed to be a question. But otherwise, thank you all. Do like 30 seconds and then I'll shut down. Again, you can find us on Slack. If you have any questions, you can always just ping me there. Thank you all so much.